Jake Morrison had been riding for 3 days straight when his horse finally gave out. The brown mare collapsed near a small stream, foam covering her mouth and sides heaving like broken bellows. Jake dismounted quickly, his spurs jingling against the rocky ground as he knelt beside the animal. "Easy, girl, easy," he whispered, stroking the horse's neck. The mare's eyes rolled back, showing white, and Jake knew she wouldn't make it much further. He had pushed her too hard, trying to escape the bounty hunters tracking him across the Badlands. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the desert landscape in shades of orange and red. Jake removed his hat and wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty sleeve. His water was running low, and he had no idea where the nearest town might be. The rocky canyon walls stretched in every direction, making navigation nearly impossible. As he considered his options, a shadow passed overhead. Jake looked up to see a large bird circling above him. But something was wrong. The bird moved too smoothly, too purposefully. It wasn't hunting for food or riding thermals. It was watching him. Jake reached for his rifle, but before he could draw it, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed off the canyon walls. Multiple sets of feet, moving with practiced stealth across the desert floor. He spun around, scanning the rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation for movement. "Show yourselves," Jake called out, his voice echoing through the canyon. "I know you're there." The footsteps stopped. An uncomfortable silence settled over the desert, broken only by the labored breathing of his dying horse. Jake's hand remained on his gun grip as he slowly turned in a circle, eyes searching every shadow and crevice. Then they appeared. 5 figures emerged from behind the rocks as if they had materialized from the stone itself. Jake had heard stories about the desert tribes, but seeing them in person was something entirely different. They wore clothing made from animal hides and desert plants, perfectly suited to the harsh environment. Their skin was weathered and dark from years under the burning sun, but it was their weapons that caught Jake's attention. Each warrior carried a spear tipped with what looked like metal, but metal unlike anything he had seen before. The tips seemed to shimmer and change color in the fading light, almost as if they were alive. The leader of the group stepped forward. He was taller than the others, with intricate tattoos covering his arms and chest. Scars crisscrossed his body, telling stories of countless battles. Around his neck hung a necklace made of what appeared to be teeth, but they were too large to belong to any animal Jake recognized. "You are far from your people, Pale Rider," the warrior said in perfect English, though his accent was unlike anything Jake had heard before. "What brings you to the sacred hunting grounds of the Keepers?" Jake tried to maintain his composure, but his heart was racing. These weren't ordinary tribal people. There was something different about them, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The way they moved was too fluid, too coordinated. "And their eyes?" "Their eyes seemed to see everything." "My horse gave out," Jake replied, gesturing toward the mare who was now barely breathing. "I'm just passing through. Don't want any trouble." The leader studied him for a long moment, those strange eyes seeming to look right through him. The other warriors remained perfectly still, their weapons ready but not threatening. Yet, there is no passing through these lands. "Cowboy," the leader said, using the word as if it tasted strange on his tongue. "The Keepers have protected this place for longer than your people have walked this continent. Every step you take here is known to us." As if to prove his point, the bird overhead let out a sharp cry. It wasn't a bird at all, Jake realized. It was some kind of scout, watching and reporting back to the tribe. "I didn't know," Jake said honestly. "I'm sorry if I trespassed. Just point me toward the nearest town and I'll be on my way." The warrior smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "The nearest settlement of your people is 7 days' walk through the most dangerous part of the desert. Your horse will not survive the journey, and neither will you." Jake felt a chill despite the desert heat. "Then what do you suggest?" "You have 2 choices," the leader replied. "You can try to leave now and die in the wasteland, or you can come with us and face our judgment." The other warriors shifted slightly, their weapons catching the last rays of sunlight. Jake realized that his choice wasn't really a choice at all. These people could track him anywhere in the desert. They knew this land in ways he couldn't imagine. "What kind of judgment?" he asked. "The kind that determines whether you live or die," the warrior replied. "But first you must prove you are worthy of our time." Without warning, the leader raised his spear and threw it. Jake dove to the side, rolling across the rocky ground as the weapon whistled past his ear. But when he looked back, the spear wasn't there. It had simply vanished, What the hell? Jake started to say, then felt cold metal against his throat. The warrior was behind him now, the spear pressed against his neck. Jake hadn't even seen him move. It should have been impossible for someone to cover that distance so quickly, especially across rough terrain. You have quick reflexes, the warrior observed. That is good. You will need them where we are going. Jake remained perfectly still, knowing that one wrong move would end his life. Where are you taking me? To our village, the leader replied, removing the spear from Jake's throat. There you will meet our chief and learn why the spirits have brought you to us. Spirits? The warrior gestured toward the sky. The stars were beginning to appear as darkness fell over the desert. Everything that happens in these lands is guided by forces beyond your understanding. Your arrival here at this time in this place, it is not coincidence. Jake stood slowly, brushing dirt from his clothes. I don't believe in that kind of thing. Belief is not required, the warrior said with another of those unsettling smiles. Truth exists whether you accept it or not. The other warriors began moving, forming a loose circle around Jake. Their coordination was perfect, as if they were communicating without speaking. Jake noticed that their movements seemed to follow patterns like a dance he didn't understand. What about my horse? Jake asked, looking back at the mare. She will be at peace, the leader replied. The desert will claim her as it claims all things eventually. As they began walking deeper into the canyon, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking toward something far more dangerous than simple tribal justice. These people were different, and not just because they lived in the desert. There was something ancient about them, something that spoke of secrets hidden in the stone and sand. The warrior who had captured him walked beside him now, no longer threatening but clearly ready to act if Jake tried to escape. What should I call you? Jake asked. I am Navik, the warrior replied, and you are about to discover why the old stories your people tell about the desert tribes are only half the truth. The journey to the village took most of the night. Jake walked between the warriors, his boots crunching against loose stone and sand. The desert had transformed in the darkness, becoming an alien landscape of shifting shadows and strange sounds. Every few minutes he heard calls echoing from the canyon walls, not quite human, but not animal either. What is that? Jake asked during one particularly haunting cry. Sentries, Navik replied without slowing his pace. They announce our approach. Jake noticed that none of the warriors carried torches or lanterns, yet they moved through the treacherous terrain as if walking in broad daylight. When he stumbled over a loose rock, one of them always appeared at his elbow to steady him before he could fall. How can you see in this darkness? Jake asked. Navik glanced at him with those unsettling eyes. The same way you see in the light. Practice. As they climbed higher into the canyon system, Jake began to notice strange markings carved into the rock faces. The symbols looked ancient, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, but in the starlight, they seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence. Those markings, Jake said, pointing toward the glowing symbols. What do they mean? They tell the story of our people, Navik replied, and they serve as warnings to those who would venture where they do not belong. What kind of warnings? Navik stopped walking and turned to face him. Do you see that symbol there? He pointed to a carving that looked like a spiral surrounded by sharp lines. It marks the boundary between your world and ours. Once we pass it, there is no going back. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean, no going back? You will understand soon enough. They continued climbing, and Jake noticed that the air was becoming thicker, almost humid despite the desert setting. Strange scents drifted on the breeze. Not the usual smells of sage and dry earth, but something organic and alive, like a garden in full bloom. Then he saw the lights. At first, Jake thought they were campfires scattered throughout the canyon ahead. But as they drew closer, he realized the lights were coming from the rock walls themselves. Entire sections of the canyon glowed with a soft blue-green radiance that pulsed like a heartbeat. What in God's name? Jake whispered. Your God has no dominion here, Navik said matter-of-factly. This is the domain of older powers. The village came into view as they rounded a bend in the canyon. Jake stopped in his tracks, unable to believe what he was seeing. The settlement wasn't built on the canyon floor like he expected. Instead, it was carved directly into the living rock of the canyon walls, rising in terraced levels that disappeared into the darkness above. But it was the people that truly shocked him. Hundreds of figures moved throughout the carved dwellings, and in the strange light Jake could see that they weren't entirely human. Some were tall and thin with elongated limbs. Others had skin that seemed to shift color like the warriors' spear tips. Children ran between the adults, but they moved too quickly, covering impossible distances in single bounds. "Welcome to the village of the keepers," Navik said, watching Jake's reaction with amusement. "Home to the last of the star-touched." "Star-touched?" "Those who carry the blood of both earth and sky," Navik explained. "We are what your people become when they stop fearing the desert and start listening to it." As they descended into the village, Jake became aware that every eye was on him. The inhabitants stopped their activities to stare at the stranger being escorted through their home. But their expressions weren't hostile. They were curious, almost hungry. "They're looking at me like I'm some kind of specimen," Jake muttered. "In a way you are," Navik replied. "It has been many years since one of the Unchanged entered our domain. Most who wander into our territory never make it past the Outer Guardians. What happened to them? They chose poorly." They approached a large structure carved into the base of the canyon wall. Unlike the other dwellings, this one was decorated with elaborate carvings that seemed to move in the strange light. Two massive warriors stood guard at the entrance, their spears crossed to block the doorway. Navik spoke to them in a language Jake had never heard before. The words seemed to flow like water, with sounds that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. After a brief exchange, the guards stepped aside. "The chief will see you now," Navik said. "But be warned, he is old and powerful even by our standards. Show respect or your judgment will be swift." The interior of the structure was larger than seemed possible given its appearance from outside. The walls were covered in the glowing symbols Jake had seen throughout the canyon. But here they were arranged in complex patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly. At the far end of the chamber, an ancient figure sat on what appeared to be a throne, carved from a single piece of black stone. The chief was clearly old beyond measure, his skin weathered to the texture of worn leather. But his eyes burned with intelligence and something else, something that made Jake want to back away. "Approach," the chief commanded in a voice like grinding stone. Jake walked forward, acutely aware of the other warriors flanking him on either side. When he was 10 feet from the throne, Navik placed a hand on his shoulder, signaling him to stop. The chief studied Jake for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Those ancient eyes seemed to catalog every detail, weighing and measuring him against some unknown standard. "You are not what I expected," the chief finally said. "The vision showed me a warrior, but you are just a man running from his mistakes." "How do you know about my mistakes?" Jake asked, then immediately regretted speaking without permission. The chief smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too white. "The desert speaks to those who know how to listen. It tells me you killed 3 men in a town called Deadwood. You took their money and fled into the wasteland." Jake's heart pounded. There was no way these people could know about what happened in Deadwood. He had covered his tracks carefully, made sure no one saw him leave town. "I acted in self-defense," Jake said. "Perhaps," the chief replied, "but that is not why the spirits brought you here." The old man rose from his throne with fluid grace that belied his apparent age. As he moved closer, Jake could see that the chief's skin had the same color-shifting quality as the warrior's weapons. "You carry something that does not belong to you," the chief said, now standing directly in front of Jake. "Something taken from a place of power." Jake's hand unconsciously moved to his coat pocket where he kept the strange metal disc he had found in the ruins outside Deadwood. He had planned to sell it in the next big town, figuring it might be worth something to a collector. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake lied. The chief's expression darkened. "Show it to me. Now." With trembling fingers, Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out the disc. It was about the size of a silver dollar, made from the same color-shifting metal as the warrior's weapons. Strange symbols covered both sides, and in the light of the village it began to glow with its own inner fire. The moment the disc appeared, every person in the chamber fell silent. The chief stared at it with a mixture of awe and fear. "Do you have any idea what this is?" the chief whispered. "Just some old trinket I found," Jake replied. The chief shook his head slowly. "This is a starstone, one of 12 that were scattered across the continent when our ancestors first arrived. Each one contains the power to transform the land itself." "Transform it how?" In the wrong hands, it could turn fertile valleys into wasteland, the chief explained. Or worse, it could tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. Jake looked down at the seemingly harmless disc in his palm. I had no idea. I'll give it back, I swear. Giving it back is not so simple, the chief said. The stone has been in your possession for days. It has already begun to change you. Change me how? But even as Jake asked the question, he began to understand. The enhanced hearing that had allowed him to detect the warrior's approach. The way his vision had sharpened in the desert light. The strange dreams he'd been having about flying through star-filled skies. The transformation cannot be reversed, the chief continued. You now carry the blood of the star-touched, whether you choose it or not. Jake stared at the disc, then at the assembled warriors surrounding him. What does that mean for me? The chief returned to his throne, his expression grave. It means you have a choice to make, Jake Morrison. You can embrace your new nature and learn to control the power within you. Or you can fight it and eventually be consumed by forces you cannot understand. And if I choose to embrace it? Then you will undergo the trials, the chief replied. If you survive them, you will become one of us. If you fail, the old man didn't need to finish the sentence. Jake understood the stakes. When do the trials begin? Jake asked. The chief smiled again, but this time it was filled with approval. They already have. Jake woke to find himself lying on a bed of soft furs in a small chamber carved from the canyon wall. Sunlight streamed through an opening high above, creating patterns on the floor that shifted as the sun moved across the sky. His body ached in ways he had never experienced before, as if every muscle and bone was being stretched and reformed. The starstone disc lay on a small table beside the bed, pulsing with that same inner light. When Jake reached for it, pain shot through his arm like lightning. The skin on his hand had changed overnight. It was darker now, with veins that glowed faintly beneath the surface. The transformation is accelerating, a voice said from the doorway. Jake turned to see a woman entering the chamber. She was clearly one of the star-touched, with the same color-shifting skin and sharp features as the warriors, but unlike them, her presence felt calming rather than threatening. I am Zara, she said, moving to examine his changed hand. I am what you might call a healer, though our medicine is different from what your people understand. How long was I unconscious? Jake asked, trying to sit up despite the pain. 2 days, Zara replied. The stone is rewriting your very essence. Most who undergo this change do not survive the first week. Jake looked at his reflection in the polished metal surface of a water basin. His eyes had changed color, shifting from brown to a deep green that seemed to glow in the dim light. His hair had grown longer and darker, and his skin had taken on the same weathered appearance as the desert dwellers. What's happening to me? You are becoming what you were always meant to be, Zara explained. The starstones do not choose randomly. They recognize something within a person that even they might not know exists. She moved to the table and picked up a bowl filled with a substance that looked like liquid starlight. Drink this. It will help ease the pain of transformation. Jake hesitated, then took the bowl and drank. The liquid was surprisingly cool and tasted of mountain springs and desert flowers. Almost immediately, the pain in his body began to subside. Why are you helping me? Jake asked. Your people could have just killed me and taken the stone. Zara smiled, and her expression was genuinely warm. Because I too was once like you. I came to this place as a lost wanderer, carrying a starstone I did not understand. That was 40 years ago. 40 years? But you don't look a day over 25. Time moves differently for the star-touched, she explained. We age but slowly. Some of our elders have lived for centuries. Before Jake could ask more questions, Navik appeared in the doorway. The warrior looked grim, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something approaching concern. It is time, he said simply. Time for what? Jake asked. Your first trial, Navik replied. The chief has decreed that you must prove your worthiness before the transformation progresses further. Jake stood, testing his balance. His body felt different, stronger, more coordinated. When he moved, it was with a fluid grace that reminded him of how the warriors had navigated the desert darkness. What kind of trial? You must retrieve a sacred artifact from the Canyon of Echoes, Navik explained. It is a test that all potential star-touched must complete. Zara frowned. The Canyon of Echoes? But the shadows have been more active there recently. Perhaps a different trial would be more appropriate. The chief's decision is final, Navik said. though Jake noticed he didn't sound happy about it. The transformation has progressed too far to delay. They led Jake through the village to a platform near the top of the canyon wall. From this height, he could see for miles across the desert landscape. In the distance, a darker canyon system cut through the red rock like a wound in the earth. "That is your destination," Navik said, pointing toward the distant canyon. "Within its depths lies the Mirror of Truth, an artifact created by the first star touched. You must retrieve it and return here before the next full moon." "How long do I have?" 3 days, Navik replied. "And you must go alone." Jake studied the treacherous terrain stretching between the village and the distant canyon. Even with his enhanced abilities, it would be a difficult journey. "What exactly are these shadows that Zara mentioned?" Navik exchanged a look with Zara before answering. "They are what remains of those who failed the transformation. When the Starstone's power consumes someone instead of changing them, their essence becomes trapped in the desert. They hunger for what they lost and will do anything to reclaim it." "Great," Jake muttered. "Vengeful ghosts. Just what I needed." Zara approached him with a pack of supplies: water, dried food, and something wrapped in cloth. "This may help," she said, handing him the wrapped item. Jake unwrapped it to reveal a knife with a blade made from the same color-shifting metal as the warriors' spears. The handle was carved from what looked like bone, inscribed with symbols that seemed to move in his peripheral vision. "It was mine, during my trials," Zara explained. "The blade can cut through shadow substance, but use it sparingly. Each strike drains some of your life force." Jake tested the weight of the knife. It felt perfectly balanced in his hand, as if it had been made specifically for him. "One more thing," Navik added. "Do not trust everything you see in the Canyon of Echoes. The shadows can create illusions, showing you what they think you want to see. Keep your focus on your mission." With final preparations complete, Jake began his descent from the village. The Star-Touched watched him go, their expressions a mixture of hope and concern. As he reached the canyon floor and started across the desert, he heard Zara call out behind him. "Remember, the mirror shows truth, but truth is not always what we expect." The journey to the Canyon of Echoes took Jake through terrain, unlike anything he had encountered during his time in the desert. The rock formations became stranger as he traveled, twisted into impossible shapes that hurt to look at directly. Plants grew in patterns that defied nature, their leaves forming spirals and geometric designs. By the second day, Jake was certain he was being followed. Shadows moved at the edge of his vision, always disappearing when he turned to look directly at them. Whispers echoed across the desert, calling his name and promising him things he desperately wanted: freedom, wealth, a life without consequences. Just mirages, he told himself, but the whispers grew more insistent as he approached the canyon. The Canyon of Echoes was aptly named. Every footstep, every breath, every heartbeat created multiple echoes that bounced off the narrow walls. The sound was disorienting, making it difficult to maintain his sense of direction. But it was the shadows themselves that proved most challenging. They began appearing more frequently as Jake descended into the canyon depths. At first, they looked like normal shadows cast by the rock formations. But gradually, Jake realized they were moving independently of any light source. The first direct encounter came when Jake stopped to rest near a small pool of water. As he knelt to drink, a shadow detached itself from the canyon wall and reached toward him with fingers of pure darkness. Jake rolled away as the shadow fingers passed through the space where his head had been. The creature let out a sound like wind through broken glass, a cry of hunger and frustration. "Stay back," Jake warned, drawing the knife Zara had given him. The shadow paused, its form rippling like water. When it spoke, its voice was a whisper that seemed to come from inside Jake's own mind. "Give us the stone," it pleaded. "We were like you once. We understand the pain. Give us the stone and end your suffering." Jake gripped the knife tighter. "I'm not giving you anything." "You cannot win," the shadow continued. "The transformation will consume you as it consumed us. But if you give us the stone, we can make the pain stop. We can make everything stop." For a moment, Jake was tempted. The constant ache in his bones, the disorienting changes to his senses, the uncertainty about what he was becoming, all of it could end. But then he remembered Zara's words about her own transformation 40 years ago. She had survived. She had become something more than human while remaining fundamentally herself. "No," Jake said firmly. "I'm going to complete this trial." The shadow let out another of those glass-breaking screams and lunged forward. Jake slashed with the knife, and where the blade touched the creature, it dissolved like smoke. But the effort left him drained, just as Zara had warned. More shadows began emerging from the canyon walls as Jake continued deeper into the maze-like passages. Some tried to bargain with him, offering false visions of easy success. Others attacked directly, forcing him to use the knife again and again. By the time Jake reached the heart of the canyon, he was exhausted, and the knife felt like it weighed 100 pounds. But there, set into a natural alcove in the rock wall, was the Mirror of Truth. The artifact was unlike anything Jake had expected. It wasn't a traditional mirror at all, but rather a flat disc of the same metal as his starstone, polished to a perfect reflective surface. Symbols around its edge pulsed with gentle light. As Jake approached the mirror, his reflection appeared on its surface. But it wasn't his current appearance. It showed him as he truly was, without illusion or deception. He saw the fear he tried to hide, the guilt over the men he had killed, the loneliness that had driven him to a life of wandering. But he also saw something else: potential. The person he could become if he had the courage to embrace the changes happening within him. "Interesting," a voice said behind him. Jake spun around to find himself face to face with another shadow. But this one was different from the others. It maintained a more solid form and spoke with clear intelligence rather than mindless hunger. "You see possibility where others see only loss," the shadow continued. "That is rare among your kind. What do you want?" Jake asked, raising his knife despite his exhaustion. "To make you an offer," the shadow replied. "I was once the greatest warrior among the Star-Touched. I chose to undergo the final transformation, to become something beyond physical existence. But the process trapped me here, neither living nor dead. And help me reclaim my physical form, and I will teach you secrets of power that the current Star-Touched have forgotten. Together we could rule not just the desert, but the entire continent." Jake looked at the shadow, then at the mirror, then at the starstone disc in his hand. 3 different paths lay before him, and he could sense that his choice here would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of everyone he had come to care about. The trial was far from over. Jake stared at the shadow warrior, feeling the weight of the decision before him. The creature's offer was tempting: power beyond imagination, the ability to shape the world according to his will. But something in the mirror's reflection caught his attention. In its surface he could see not just himself, but also the shadow as it truly was. The creature wasn't a former Star-Touched warrior at all. It was something far older and more dangerous, a fragment of the original darkness that the Star-Touched had been created to fight against. The mirror showed him the truth. This entity had been imprisoned in the canyon for centuries, waiting for someone with a starstone to free it. "I can see what you really are," Jake said, gripping his knife despite his exhaustion. "You're not Star-Touched. You're something else entirely." The shadow's form rippled with anger. "Clever boy. But it changes nothing. You are too weak to resist me, and too far from help to matter." The creature lunged forward, moving faster than any of the other shadows Jake had encountered. But as it reached for him, Jake did something unexpected. Instead of trying to fight, he pressed his hand against the Mirror of Truth. The moment his palm made contact with the polished metal surface, energy surged through him, not just his own power, but the combined strength of every Star-Touched who had ever completed this trial. The mirror had been absorbing their essence for generations, storing it for a moment exactly like this. Light exploded outward from the mirror, washing over Jake and the shadow. The creature screamed as the pure energy struck it, its form beginning to dissolve. "This is not over, Star-Touched." The shadow howled as it was torn apart by the light. "We are Legion, and we will find a way to return." When the light faded, Jake found himself alone in the canyon alcove. The Mirror of Truth had gone dark, its energy spent. But Jake could feel the change within himself. The transformation was complete. He was fully Star-Touched now, connected to the desert and its ancient mysteries in ways he was only beginning to understand. The journey back to the village should have taken 2 days, but Jake discovered he could move across the desert terrain with supernatural speed. His enhanced senses allowed him to navigate by following the energy signatures of the Star-Touched settlement, like following a beacon across the wasteland. He arrived at the village as the sun was setting on the 2nd day, the Mirror of Truth secured in his pack. The entire population had gathered in the central plaza, as if they had been waiting for him. Chief stood at the center of the crowd, his ancient eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Welcome home, brother," he said as Jake approached. "Brother?" Jake asked. "You have completed the first trial and survived the Shadow's temptation," the chief explained. "Few manage both. You are now truly one of the star-touched." The crowd erupted in celebration, voices raised in songs that seemed to harmonize with the wind itself. Jake found himself swept up in the festivities, accepting congratulations from warriors who had seemed so threatening just days before. But as the celebration continued, Navik pulled him aside with a serious expression. "Your trial revealed something troubling," the warrior said. "The shadow you encountered was more powerful than any we have seen in decades. It spoke of others like itself, or what does that mean?" Jake asked. "It means the ancient enemy is stirring," Navik replied. "The Void Walkers, beings of pure darkness that existed before the Star-Touched came to this world. We thought they were all destroyed or imprisoned long ago." Zara joined their conversation, her face etched with concern. "The elders have been sensing disturbances in the deep desert. Strange storms that leave the land corrupted. Animals fleeing their territories. All signs point to the same conclusion, which is, war is coming," she said simply. "The question is whether we are prepared for it." Over the following days, Jake began his education as a full member of the Star-Touched. The training was unlike anything he could have imagined. His instructors taught him to shape the desert sand into weapons, to move through solid rock as if it were water, and to communicate with the ancient spirits that dwelt in the deep places of the earth. But it was his sessions with the chief that proved most enlightening. "Your people tell stories of the Old West," the chief said during one lesson. "They speak of brave settlers taming a wild frontier, but they do not know the true history of this land." They sat in the chief's private chamber, surrounded by artifacts that predated human civilization. The walls were covered with star maps and symbols that seemed to move when Jake wasn't looking directly at them. "What is the true history?" Jake asked. "Long ago, beings of pure light came from the stars," the chief began. "They found this world overrun by creatures of darkness, the Void Walkers. A great war was fought, lasting thousands of years." The chief gestured to a mural that covered one entire wall. It depicted a battle between shining figures and writhing shadows, with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. "The light beings could not destroy the darkness completely, but they could bind it," the chief continued. "They created guardians, the first Star-Touched, to watch over the prison worlds and prevent the darkness from escaping." Prison worlds? "Pocket dimensions where the Void Walkers were sealed away," the chief explained. "But the seals weaken over time. Every few centuries we must renew them or risk the darkness breaking free." Jake studied the mural more closely. In one corner he noticed a figure that looked familiar, a human carrying what appeared to be a starstone disc. "That looks like me," he said. The chief nodded. "The light beings left prophecies before they departed for the stars. They spoke of a time when the seals would begin failing simultaneously, requiring a new kind of guardian, one who bridges the gap between the unchanged humans and the Star-Touched." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "You think I'm this prophesied guardian?" "The signs are clear," the chief replied. "You carry one of the original starstones, you survived transformation without losing your human essence, and you resisted the Shadow's corruption. Most importantly, you arrived precisely when the ancient warnings predicted." Before Jake could respond, urgent voices echoed from outside the chamber. Navik burst through the entrance, his face grim with urgency. "Chief, we have reports from the outer scouts," he said breathlessly. 3 of the boundary markers have gone dark. The seals are failing." The chief rose from his throne with fluid grace. "How much time do we have?" "Days, perhaps weeks at most," Navik replied. "The corruption is spreading faster than we anticipated." Jake stood as well, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "What do you need me to do?" "First, you must master your full abilities," the chief said. "Then you must undertake the great journey to the heart of the desert, where the Master Seal is located." "The heart of the desert?" "A place that exists between dimensions," the chief explained. "It can only be reached by one who carries the light of the stars within them. If the Master Seal fails, every prison world will open simultaneously." The urgency of the situation became clear as Jake spent the next several days in intensive training. His abilities grew stronger each day. He learned to project barriers of solid light, to sense the presence of void walkers from great distances, and to channel the power of the Starstone through his body without being consumed by it. But it was during a sparring session with Navek that Jake discovered his most important ability. They were practicing combat techniques in a training circle when Navek launched a particularly aggressive attack. Jake instinctively raised his hands to defend himself, and instead of blocking the blow, he somehow reversed its direction. Navek's own force sent him flying backward into the canyon wall. "Extraordinary," the chief said, having witnessed the exchange. "You have the power of reversal, the ability to turn an enemy's strength against them." This was the primary weapon used against the Void Walkers in the ancient war. As Jake's training intensified, disturbing reports continued to arrive from the outer territories. Entire settlements had been found empty, their inhabitants vanished without a trace. Livestock was discovered drained of all life force, leaving behind only desiccated husks. Most troubling of all, several Star-Touched scouts had encountered creatures that shouldn't exist, shadows given physical form, hungry for the light that dwelt within the Guardians. "The Void Walkers are not waiting for the seals to fail completely," Zara observed during a council meeting. "They are sending advance forces through the weakened barriers." "Then we must accelerate our timeline," the chief declared. "Jake, you must begin the great journey tomorrow." "Am I ready?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "No one is ever truly ready for what awaits at the heart of the desert," the chief replied. "But ready or not, you are our only hope." That evening, as Jake prepared for what might be his final night in the village, Zara approached him with a gift wrapped in starcloth. "Something to remember us by," she said with a sad smile. Jake unwrapped the bundle to reveal a cloak made from the same color-shifting material as the warriors' weapons. But this one was different. It seemed to contain actual starlight woven into its fibers. "It belonged to the last guardian who attempted the great journey," Zara explained. "He did not return, but the spirits whispered that his cloak would be needed again." "What happened to him?" "No one knows," Zara replied. "The heart of the desert keeps its secrets well." As Jake fastened the cloak around his shoulders, he felt a strange sensation, as if he was connecting with someone who had worn it before. For just a moment, he caught a glimpse of memories that weren't his own. A desperate battle against impossible odds. The weight of an entire world's survival resting on one person's shoulders. "I won't fail," Jake said, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to Zara or to the memory of the cloak's previous owner. "I know you won't," Zara replied. "But Jake, if you do encounter the previous guardian, remember that the heart of the desert changes people. He may not be the ally you expect him to be." As dawn broke over the village, the entire population gathered to see Jake off. The chief performed a blessing ceremony, marking Jake's forehead with symbols that glowed with inner fire. Navek presented him with weapons forged from pure star metal. Even the children of the village came forward with small gifts. Stones carved with protective runes, dried flowers that would never wilt, songs written in the ancient language. "Remember," the chief said as Jake prepared to depart, "the heart of the desert will test more than your power. It will test your soul. Hold fast to who you are no matter what you encounter." Jake nodded, shouldering his pack and checking his weapons one final time. The starstone disc pulsed against his chest, its rhythm matching his heartbeat. As he walked away from the village toward the distant mountains where the heart of the desert was said to lie, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking toward his destiny. Whether that destiny was salvation or destruction remained to be seen. Behind him, the Star-Touched watched until he disappeared into the shimmering heat haze. They would maintain the outer defenses as long as possible, but they all knew the truth. Everything now depended on one man's ability to succeed where others had failed. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance. The journey to the heart of the desert took Jake through landscapes that defied all natural law. Mountains that floated in midair, their peaks disappearing into swirling clouds of pure energy. Valleys where time moved backward, showing him glimpses of battles fought centuries ago. Rivers that flowed uphill, their waters singing with voices of the ancient ones. His starstone disk grew warmer with each mile traveled, pulling him forward like a compass needle pointing toward magnetic north. But it wasn't just guiding him, it was changing him further. Jake's vision now extended far beyond normal sight, allowing him to see the energy patterns that connected all living things. His hearing picked up conversations from miles away, whispered in languages he had never learned but somehow understood. On the third day of his journey, Jake encountered his first sign that others had passed this way before him. Ancient campsites dotted the trail, marked with symbols he recognized from the village. But these sites felt wrong somehow, cold and empty, as if whoever had made them had been slowly drained of life. It was at the largest of these campsites that Jake found the first body. The skeletal remains were still partially clothed in star-touched garments, but the bones had been bleached white as if exposed to decades of harsh sunlight. A broken spear lay beside the skeleton, its star-metal blade corroded beyond repair. Jake knelt beside the remains, placing his hand on the skull. Immediately, visions flooded his mind, memories from the dead warrior's final moments. He saw creatures of living shadow pouring from cracks in the earth, overwhelming a group of star-touched scouts. He watched as the darkness consumed his fellow warriors one by one, draining them of their life force and leaving only empty husks behind. But most disturbing was the final image, a figure in a star cloak standing atop a rocky outcropping, watching the massacre without intervening. The figure's face was hidden, but Jake recognized the cloak. It was identical to the one he now wore. The previous guardian, Jake whispered to himself. He was here when this happened. As Jake continued his journey, he found more evidence of the ancient battle. Weapons scattered across the desert floor, star-touched artifacts partially buried in sand dunes. Most troubling of all, he began to see signs that the Void Walkers had established permanent strongholds in this realm. Twisted spires of black stone rose from the desert floor like infected thorns. The very air around them shimmered with malevolent energy. Plants that grew too close to these structures withered and died, their life force drawn away to feed the darkness within. But it was the sounds coming from inside the spires that truly unnerved Jake. Whispers in languages that predated human civilization. Screams of anguish that might have been echoing for centuries. And underneath it all, a rhythmic pulsing like a massive heartbeat counting down to some terrible culmination. On the fifth day, Jake reached the barrier that separated the physical world from the heart of the desert. It appeared as a wall of shifting light that stretched from horizon to horizon, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. As he approached, his starstone disk began to resonate with harmonic frequencies that made his bones ache. The barrier recognized him, or rather, it recognized the power he carried. As Jake stepped forward, the light parted like curtains, revealing a pathway into another dimension entirely. The heart of the desert was unlike anything Jake had imagined. It existed in a space between spaces, where the laws of physics bent to accommodate impossible geometries. Crystalline structures floated in mid-air, connected by bridges of solidified starlight. In the distance, Jake could see what appeared to be a massive tree growing upside down from the sky, its roots disappearing into swirling nebulae. But it was the figure standing in the center of this impossible landscape that commanded Jake's attention. The man wore the same star cloak that Jake carried, but his had been transformed by centuries of exposure to the energies of the heart. Instead of merely shifting colors, it now contained actual galaxies swirling within its fabric. The guardian's face was ageless, neither young nor old, marked by experiences that no human mind should be able to comprehend. "You're earlier than I expected," the figure said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "But then the timeline has been accelerating lately." "You're the previous guardian," Jake said, keeping his hand near his weapons. "I am Thomas Meridian," the figure replied, "though I stopped thinking of myself by that name long ago. Here, I am simply the keeper of the seals." Jake studied the man carefully, remembering Zara's warning about how the heart of the desert changed people. Thomas appeared calm and rational, but there was something in his eyes, a depth of knowledge that seemed to border on madness. "The seals are failing," Jake said. "I've come to renew them." Thomas smiled, but it wasn't entirely a pleasant expression. "Renew them? My dear boy, the seals aren't failing. I'm allowing them to weaken." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. "What?" "For 300 years, I have maintained the barriers between our world and the Void Realm," Thomas explained, beginning to pace around the floating platform they stood upon. 3 centuries of constant vigilance, of fighting off incursions, of watching good people die to maintain a system that was always doomed to fail. But if the seals break completely, the Void Walkers will be free to invade both our world and the human realm. Thomas finished. Yes, I know. Millions will die. Perhaps billions. Jake drew his sword, star metal singing as it cleared its sheath. Then why are you doing this? Because the alternative is worse, Thomas replied calmly. The seals require constant maintenance, constant sacrifice. Every generation we lose more star-touched to the darkness. Eventually, there won't be enough of us left to maintain even a single barrier. The Guardian reached into his star cloak and withdrew an object that made Jake's starstone disc pulse with recognition. It was another disc, but this one was larger and more complex, covered with symbols that seemed to contain the accumulated knowledge of centuries. This is the Master Stone, Thomas explained. It controls all the others. With it you could maintain the seals as I have done, or... He paused, his eyes gleaming with new possibility. Or what? Or we could try something that's never been attempted before. Instead of just maintaining the barriers, we could strengthen them. Permanently. Jake felt hope stirring in his chest. How? Thomas grinned, and suddenly Jake could see the young man he must have been 3 centuries ago, full of determination and ready to take on impossible odds. We're going to need help, Thomas said. A lot of help. But if we can gather enough star-touch together, if we can coordinate our efforts across all dimensions simultaneously, we could create barriers that never need maintenance. Jake finished, understanding dawning. Exactly. But it will require every star touched in existence working together in perfect harmony. One mistake, one moment of doubt or fear, and the backlash will destroy us all. Jake looked at the Master Stone, feeling the weight of decision upon him once again. But this time, instead of despair, he felt possibility. When do we start? He asked. The plan Thomas and Jake devised was ambitious beyond anything attempted in the history of the Star-Touched. Using the heart of the desert as a focal point, they would coordinate every Guardian, across all dimensions to channel their power, simultaneously into the Master Stone. The combined energy would create permanent barriers that could withstand any assault from the Voidwalkers. But first, they had to reach every star-touched settlement before the seals failed completely. Thomas had learned to project his consciousness across vast distances during his centuries of isolation. Now he taught Jake the same technique, showing him how to split his awareness among multiple bodies of light that could travel faster than thought itself. Remember, Thomas warned as they prepared to make contact with the scattered communities, not all Star-Touched will welcome this plan. Many have grown comfortable with the current system, despite its flaws. They fear change more than they fear gradual extinction. Jake's first projection carried him back to his adopted village, where he found the Star-Touched preparing for a siege. The outer defensive positions were being reinforced with barriers of crystallized starlight, while scouts reported increasing Void Walker activity throughout the region. Jake, Zara called out as his projection materialized in the central plaza. Thank the spirits you're safe. We felt disturbances in the dimensional barriers. The corruption is spreading faster than ever. The chief emerged from his dwelling, his ancient eyes immediately recognizing that this wasn't Jake's physical form. You have reached the heart of the desert. What did you learn? Jake explained Thomas's plan, watching the reactions of the assembled Star-Touched. Some nodded with understanding, recognizing the logic of creating permanent barriers. Others shook their heads in fear, unwilling to risk everything on an untested strategy. The danger is enormous, one of the elder warriors pointed out. If we fail, there will be no second chance. Every defensive position will be simultaneously weakened. And if we succeed, Navek countered, our children will never have to face this threat again. The debate continued for hours, but eventually the chief called for silence. This decision cannot be made by this village alone, he declared. We must contact the other settlements and hear their counsel. Similar debates raged across every Star-Touched community as Jake and Thomas made their case. Some groups agreed immediately, desperate for any solution to their deteriorating situation. Others demanded proof that the plan would work, proof that neither Jake nor Thomas could provide. The most difficult conversation took place with the High Council of Keepers, the oldest and most conservative of the Star-Touched leadership. You ask us to trust the judgment of a human who has been Star-Touched for mere weeks, Council Leader Arcturus said dismissively, and a guardian who has been isolated for centuries, possibly driven mad by his solitude. I ask you to trust the evidence of your own eyes, Jake replied. How many villages have fallen to corruption in the past month? How many guardians have we lost? The current system is failing. All systems eventually fail, Arcturus responded. That does not mean we should abandon caution for the sake of desperate action. Thomas's projection appeared beside Jake's. Arcturus, old friend, I understand your reluctance, but I have seen what lies ahead if we continue on the current path. The Void Walkers grow stronger with each passing day while our numbers dwindle. This may be our last opportunity to act from a position of strength. The High Council deliberated for days while the corruption spread further across the dimensional boundaries. Jake found himself growing increasingly frustrated with their caution, but Thomas counseled patience. They are right to be careful, Thomas explained during one of their strategy sessions in the heart of the desert. What we're proposing has never been attempted because the risks are genuinely enormous. If our timing is off by even a few seconds, or if any guardian fails to maintain proper synchronization, the resulting energy discharge could tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. Despite the challenges, support for the plan gradually grew. Younger Star-Touched were especially eager to try something new, tired of living under the constant threat of Voidwalker incursions. Several settlements that had recently lost members to corruption attacks threw their support behind the proposal. Immediately, the breakthrough came when the border outpost of Sarin Falls reported a successful test of coordinated barrier strengthening. 5 guardians working together had managed to create a small permanent barrier that required no maintenance energy. The barrier was only the size of a house, but it proved the theoretical foundation of Jake and Thomas's plan. If 5 can create a permanent barrier of that size, Zara observed during a council meeting, then theoretically, every Star-Touched working together could create barriers large enough to protect entire dimensions. Word of the successful test spread quickly, and one by one, the holdout communities began to agree to the plan. Even the High Council eventually voted to participate, though Arcturus insisted on multiple safeguards and escape protocols. With consensus finally achieved, the real work began. Jake and Thomas spent weeks calculating the precise timing required for the great working. Every guardian had to channel their energy at exactly the right moment, and that moment had to be synchronized across multiple dimensions where time flowed at different rates. Meanwhile, across all the Star-Touched settlements, preparations were made for what everyone understood might be their final battle. Warriors sharpened weapons that hadn't been used in decades. Healers prepared remedies for injuries that might be beyond normal healing. Families said goodbyes just in case, but it was the children who provided the most hope. Too young to participate directly in the great working, they would be protected in the deepest shelters while their elders risked everything for their future. When Jake visited the main village one final time before the attempt, a young girl named Kira presented him with a drawing. It showed figures of light standing together against a dark sky, their combined radiance pushing back the shadows. At the center of the group, she had drawn 2 figures holding hands, one wearing a star cloak, the other carrying a glowing disc. "That's you and the old guardian," Kira explained solemnly. "My grandmother told me you're going to save everyone." Jake knelt down to her level. "We're going to try our best," he promised. The day of the great working arrived with unusual weather across all dimensions. Skies that had been clear suddenly filled with aurora-like lights. Animals that normally avoided Star-Touched settlements gathered at the edges of villages, as if sensing that something momentous was about to occur. In the heart of the desert, Jake and Thomas made their final preparations. The Master Stone had been connected to a complex array of crystalline amplifiers that would boost and coordinate the incoming energy from every Star-Touched participant. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked as they took their positions at opposite ends of the array. Jake felt the weight of every Starstone disk that had ever been created, all of them now resonating in harmony with the Master Stone. Across the dimensions, thousands of guardians were taking their positions, adding their voices to a song of power that had been building for hours. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jake replied. Thomas raised the Master Stone above his head. "Then let us begin." The energy that flowed through the heart of the desert was beyond anything Jake had imagined possible. Power from every Star-Touched in existence channeled through him and Thomas, directed by their combined will into the dimensional barriers that protected countless worlds from the darkness. But the Voidwalkers had sensed what was happening. As the barriers began to strengthen, creatures of living shadow erupted from every weak point in the dimensional fabric, desperately trying to break through before the permanent seals could be established. Jake felt his consciousness expand across multiple battlefields simultaneously. In some places, Star-touched warriors held defensive positions against waves of void walkers. In others, entire settlements were under siege by creatures that should not have been able to breach the barriers at all. "They're making a final push," Thomas warned, his voice strained by the effort of maintaining the energy flow. "Everything they have left all at once." The battle raged across dimensions as the great working continued. Jake found himself fighting on multiple fronts, his projected consciousness battling void walkers while his physical body channeled ever-increasing amounts of power through the Master Stone. At the village, he had come to think of as home, Navek led a desperate defense against creatures that poured from a tear in the dimensional fabric. Zara worked frantically to maintain the barrier around the children's shelter as shadows pressed against the protective light. The chief himself took up weapons he hadn't wielded in decades, standing alongside warriors a fraction of his age. But slowly, steadily, the permanent barriers began to take shape. Jake could feel them forming, layer upon layer of crystallized starlight that would endure long after every current star touched had passed into legend. The Void Walkers sensed their defeat approaching and launched one final, desperate assault. The largest concentration of darkness Jake had ever encountered surged toward the heart of the desert itself, seeking to destroy the focal point of the Great Working. "They're coming for us directly," Thomas warned. "Can you maintain the energy flow while fighting?" Jake gripped his star metal sword in one hand while keeping the other pressed against the Master Stone. "We're about to find out." The battle in the heart of the desert was like nothing from the old legends. Jake and Thomas fought back-to-back against creatures of pure malevolence, while simultaneously channeling enough power to reshape the fundamental structure of reality. Every sword stroke had to be perfectly timed to avoid disrupting the energy flow. Every defensive move had to account for the crystalline array that surrounded them. But just when it seemed they might be overwhelmed, help arrived from an unexpected source. The spirits of every star touched who had ever died defending the barriers materialized around them, their ghostly forms wielding weapons of pure light. Led by the warrior whose bones Jake had found on his journey to the heart, they threw themselves against the Voidwalker assault with fierce determination. "We who have fallen will not let our sacrifice be meaningless," the spirit warrior declared as he cut down a creature of shadow. "Finish what we started, guardians of the new age." With the spirits holding back the worst of the assault, Jake and Thomas were able to complete the great working. The final barrier snapped into place with a sound like the universe itself sighing in relief. Across every dimension, the permanent seals blazed to life. Void walkers found themselves cut off from their source of power, their forms dissolving as the darkness that sustained them was finally banished. The tears in reality sealed themselves with crystallized starlight that would endure for millennia. In the heart of the desert, Jake and Thomas collapsed beside the now quiet Master Stone. The battle was over. The threat that had plagued the universe for countless ages was finally ended. "We did it," Jake gasped, barely believing the words. Thomas smiled, looking younger than he had since Jake first met him. "We did indeed. And now, for the first time in 300 years, I can finally go home." The celebrations across the star-touched settlements lasted for days. But for Jake, the most meaningful moment came when young Kira presented him with a new drawing. This one showed the same figures of light, but now they were gathered not in battle, but in peace. Children played at their feet while Aurora danced overhead. "Now you can rest," she said solemnly. "The shadows are gone." Jake looked around at the people he had come to love, at the village that had become his true home, and at the desert that stretched endlessly under star-filled skies. He had begun this journey as a desperate outlaw fleeing his mistakes. He was ending it as a guardian who had helped save two worlds. But perhaps most importantly, he was ending it as someone who had finally found where he belonged. Thomas chose to remain in the heart of the desert, not as a lonely guardian of failing seals, but as a teacher for future generations of star-touched. Jake returned to his village, where he took up the role of chief defender, helping to train the next generation in the use of their abilities. The starstones still pulsed with inner light, but now their glow spoke of peace rather than desperate necessity. The old prophecies had been fulfilled, the ancient enemy defeated, and the future secured for generations yet to come. Sometimes on clear desert nights, Jake would climb to the highest point of the canyon and look up at the stars. They seemed brighter now, as if celebrating the victory of light over darkness, and in their twinkling patterns he could swear he saw the faces of all those who had fought and died to make this peace possible. The cowboy who had stumbled into destiny had become the guardian, who ensured that Destiny would have a future worth protecting.